Ah, New Orleans, how it beckoned to me. The history, the mystery, the culture, music, food, beverage. I had longed to go to New Orleans ever since I could remember. But sadly, every time my opportunity came up, something got in the way. My friends would invite me to Mardi Gras for spring break or to jazz festival, and I would always have to say no. Until the second to last time. The second to last time I said no, I decided I'd had enough. It was still on my mind 2 or 3 weeks later when I was sitting at my desk at work. Now, I worked for a Hilton hotel at the time, and we're not very highly paid, but we do get the perks of the employee rate at hotels around the world. So I just happened to check the dates that were about 360 days from now and discovered a $29 rate at the Hampton Inn French Quarter. Now, I'm famous for abandoning shopping carts on websites everywhere. So the fact that I was daydreaming online didn't necessarily mean that I was going to make it to New Orleans. But nonetheless, I entered in my information, printed out a confirmation number, and decided I have almost a year to figure it out. Now, several months later, I was having a conversation with my friend Bob, who I have traveled with very successfully on a number of occasions, and he was talking about how much he really wanted to go to the Jazz Fest in New Orleans. And I said, well, as it turns out, I have some reservations for the Jazz Fest in New Orleans. And within 24 hours, our plans were set. We had airline tickets, we had festival tickets. All we had to do was show up, board the plane, and finally experience the city of my dreams. Well, the Jazz Fest is in late April and early May, and everything was on track until about the end of March, when the complication began. You see, I had started dating a new guy, and this was not unusual, but this time was different. He was a great guy. He was a smart guy. He was an ambitious guy. I thought he was kind. And one of the best things about him is he actually supported my independence rather than try to squash that independence. And then, after only 3 weeks, he tells me that he is also going to New Orleans. His trip will be leaving just a few days before mine. He will be gone for 10 days, 3 days in New Orleans, and then a 7-day cruise. Would I like to join him? Wow, how romantic. A trip to New Orleans and a cruise. Things are going great, but I'm just not that kind of girl. And so sadly, I told him that I could not join him on his trip. And in the back of my mind, I thought, Bob really owes me. Because if I didn't go on our trip, he wouldn't have been able to go because he is not a Hilton employee. So the day before Bob and I are to leave, I get an email from Greg. And he says, I just wanted you to know. I met someone while I was down here, and she's going on the cruise. Right? So obviously, I was angry at her. What kind of girl goes on a cruise with a guy she's only known for 2 days? Clearly, something was wrong with her. So Bob and I hop on our plane and we get down to New Orleans, and all of this is just swirling in my mind. But it's hard to be angry in New Orleans It is, however, easy to make very bad decisions in New Orleans. Some of you are laughing like you've been there. So we went to the jazz festival on our first day down there, and then we followed that up with a couple of days of sightseeing around town. On our last day of sightseeing, somewhere in the middle of our trip, we wandered into the Voodoo Museum. Now, I don't really believe in a lot of this hocus-pocus mystical stuff, but it was interesting to see the shrunken heads and the animal parts and all of the other things involved in voodoo. And when we were done, Bob headed out into the street, and I was following along, when all of a sudden, something took over my mind and my body. And I headed back into the museum, over to this booth in the corner where you could cast a spell on someone. And without even consciously thinking about it, I took my little slip of paper and I wrote out a curse, a terrible illness, vomiting, the works on this unsuspecting woman that was on his mind. And then headed out into the humid sun, where Bob and I decided to call it a day and head over to the Hotel Monteleone to take a little ride on the carousel bar that they have here. Round and round the cocktails went. And as it started getting dark, we headed back to our hotel, where they happened to have this manager's reception, complete with all the cheap wine you could drink. And while we were there, we made friends with another couple of people that were staying there, and they invited us back up to their room to enjoy even more beverages. I don't know at what point I left their room that night. Thankfully, I don't really remember much after that. I did, however, wake up in the bathtub wearing only my comforter. It was a great night. And I was empty. My stomach was empty. My head was empty. But I wasn't angry anymore. And Bob opens the door and he says, "What did you do?" Of course, I didn't remember the puke, but he did. He said, "Did you screw up and put that curse on yourself?" And I thought about it, and I realized, well, goodness, I didn't specify which girl. Maybe he was thinking about me. Ooh. Well, so anyhow, we did enjoy the rest of our Jazz Fest, and when we got home, I can tell you, I never did hear from Greg again. I have, however, gone back to New Orleans many, many times, but I have never, ever gone back to the Voodoo Museum.